Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Off the Shelf. I'm your host, Paul Turner, and today we are featuring an extraordinary ministry, a hard-hitting ministry, if you will, with Josh Boyd, who is the chaplain and founder of Fight Church out in Las Vegas. And so we welcome him to Off the Shelf today. Hello, Josh. How are you doing?
Not too bad. How's it going?
Man, fantastic. And I'll mention real quick the fact that we connected because you had seen a video I had done, an off-the-shelf episode with Mikey Bridges, and I don't know, this might be my destiny. It might be the fact that I just do out-of-the-norm ministries for the rest of my life. These would just be interviews with people that are doing great stuff for God that people normally don't think about, I think.
Well, that wouldn't be such a bad idea. There's more and more ministries out there that are stepping outside of the box, and then there's some ministries that are stepping outside the box, kicking it down the road, and lighting it on fire. So,
sounds good to me, man. I'm ready for it. Well, Josh, we talked a little bit, but go ahead and explain to our viewers today. And by the way, if you are watching the show, first of all, thank you. And feel free to leave a comment as we're talking or leave something in the message box there. And, of course, Josh will be able to answer questions a little bit later as well. So, but, Josh, tell me a little bit about how you came across. We talked a little bit about being in a traditional church setting and what was the impetus for founding a Fight Church and ministering to MMA fighters there in Las Vegas.
well, I youth pastored for years, but even before that, when I was in high school, I came across my first UFC video, and I don't remember how I came across it, but it was right around the time it got started back in the mid-'90s. And I remember going to every box office video and Blockbuster video within a reasonable driving distance of my hometown, and I would go to the special interest section in sports, and it was normally some Jane Fonda workout videos and some baseball bloopers tapes, and then every once in a while there would be a UFC, and so I started grabbing them, and I just was consuming that. I just loved the sport. It was just so raw, and it was a true challenge. You know, it was taking boxing and karate and all these different disciplines and just combining them. And so I was hooked from the very beginning. So I was always a big, huge fan. And then when we moved here to Las Vegas to do a church plant, I ended up getting some tickets, comp tickets to go to a few events. And I was working at a grocery store. I started running into fighters and coaches. And here in Vegas, you're just saturated in MMA promotion and marketing. And so one thing led to another, and I started to kind of look into it, found out that nobody was ministering to this sport, to this people group.
Well, and we talked a little bit, too, about the traditional sensitivity. And, Josh, if you can turn I don't know if it's your volume or not, if you can turn your volume up a little bit, you're coming through just a little bit, tamped down a little bit. But if you can tell me a little bit about that transition, too, from youth. Now, youth ministry is a lot like MMA fighting, right? Because we start in, we enter the squared circle or the octagon every Wednesday to deal with teenagers, right? How is the transition from traditional youth ministry been from moving from that to a church format to an in-the-box type of scenario to a really out-of-the-box type of scenario?
Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay, good. The whole transition has been crazy because, when you work as a youth pastor in a church, you have a board, you have a senior pastor most likely that you work under. You might even work under another pastor who works under that pastor. And when we came out here to Las Vegas originally to do a church plant project, it was going to be a whole different scenario because it was just my wife and I and our kids and then one other couple and then their kids. And so right there was already a huge transition for us. And the type of ministry was going to be much more relationship-based and getting rid of some of those barriers and some of those, confinements. And so then transitioning even from that to doing what we're doing now was an even bigger leap.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I can see how making that leap, because now you have to make all the decisions, right? There's nobody there to really save the bacon. Nobody's pulling anything out of the fire here, are they?
No, it's a pretty much the buck stops here for sure.
Well, let's talk about some of your. Let's talk about, because you told me today you had a schedule to do. You go and you hit the gyms, and tell me about what is the a day in the life of an MMA chaplain. What does that look like?
Well, I'll tell you what, every day is an adventure because the logistics doing this type of ministry is just crazy. Most sports chaplaincy programs are a little bit more scheduled, more regimented because it's a team sport. Every team has team practices on certain days at certain times, and so you go to the one team that you're chaplaining, and you know that on Tuesday at 2:30, right after team practice, you have a chapel gathering, and that's just not the case with MMA. It's an individual sport. There's multiple gyms. Most of these guys are in their early 20s. They don't get a salary like if they're in AAA baseball or hockey, right. And so they're working 2 and 3 different part-time jobs. And so the day in the life of an MMA chaplain is it runs the gamut. You know, most days I try to get to at least one of the gyms. I try to get to the biggest gyms here in town and just try to build relationships, kind of do my rounds, and then that's when guys that are more comfortable, they've met me a few times, we have a bridge built there, they'll pull me aside, and we'll either be able to have a conversation or another day later on that week, and then that's kind of how it goes. And then on top of meeting with the fighters, you know, I'm meeting with coaches, I'm meeting with event promoters, and different things like that, and so there's just a little bit more to it because the sport's so young and it's so spread out logistically.
What do you find when you go into the gyms? Do you already have I don't know, I would say, you know, in church terms you'd call it a core group of people, you know, some already maybe fighters, MMA fighters that are believers that are attracted to that, just like you have, you know, a baseball team where maybe chapel is you know, optional or something like that. Guys can kind of come and go. But do you run into guys who are already believers, who are already kind of on board with what you're doing to help facilitate it, or is it all pretty much raw where you just start from scratch?
Well, there's definitely guys that I've met and built relationships 2 years, 3 years that are believers, and when we meet or when I make contact with them, either in person at the gym or via Facebook or on the phone. I have guys that I contact regularly, and it is more of an accountability situation where I can say, hey, did you get to church this past weekend? How's that going? I can check in on their relationships because I know more about them, and they'll ask me spiritual questions. They'll have me pray with them before they compete at an event and that sort of thing. So it is kind of a core group. One disadvantage that we're at is that the sport's very transient. And so guys will move here from Idaho or Iowa or wherever, and they'll train for 6 months, 8 months, a year, but then they'll not be able to make it financially, or some other circumstance will take them back home. And so unfortunately I see a lot of guys come and I see a lot of guys go, but I still stay in contact with a lot of guys all over the country. And so I'll still check in on them on the phone. I'll try to get a hold of guys if I happen to know a pastor there in the area, and keep tabs on them a little bit.
What's the response? I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine.
Okay. I was going to say, what's the response when they see Fight Church and you're wearing your Fight Church shirt and things like that? What tends to be, and you're in a gym and it's filled with all kinds of different people, what's people's reaction to that? What are people's kind of feeling towards it? Do they just ask you about it, say, hey, what's Fight Church? Or what seems to be their demeanor towards it?
Yeah, you know what? Overall, I have to say that I have been pleasantly surprised that the overall acceptance or whatever has been amazing. I have run into very few people in the fight world that have been negative in any way. And there was a little bit of standoffishness at first, but once I got into the gyms several times over and they saw me at the events, you know, everyone was very accepting, and it's been pretty amazing. And now when I walk into a gym, you'll hear guys yell from way across the mat or whatever. They'll be like, hey, Fight Church is in the house, or they'll say, hey, Josh, what's up? And everybody gives me the head nod and fist bumps and everything. And it's been kind of ironic because the people who have seen the shirt and kind of been like, oh, I wonder what that means, or what's that about, has mostly been Christians. It's mostly been, people at churches and things like that. So it's been kind of different because I thought, here I'm going into this rough and tumble subculture, and it's going to be really hard, and it's been exactly the opposite.
So what we're seeing here, and just from your description, and I compare it a little bit to what Mikey Bridges was talking about, that the world is not so much does not want Jesus around, right? The concept is like, we don't go to those places because nobody wants Jesus around, nobody wants church, nobody wants any of that stuff. But what you're finding is the opposite. That basically people are looking for just some authentic people to show up and say, look, and have faith, and to kind of work out the issues that you work through.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, everybody that I talk to, everybody that I interact with, they have no problem with my faith. They have no problem with Jesus or spirituality or anything like that. Even guys that I see on Facebook that are posting very anti-Christian things, and they're always posting some sarcastic quote from somebody, or I see them posting things that are from atheist Facebook pages and stuff. When I bump into those guys at the gym, or when I interact with them on Facebook or anything like that, they're super cool with me, because I think that there's a kind of a disconnect where they know me, and they know that I help people and that my heart is into this and that I'm in it for the right reasons. But when they see TV preachers and when they see the stereotypical Christianity that's presented by the media and that sort of thing, they hate that and they have a problem with that. Yeah. They don't have a problem with me talking about Jesus and praying with guys before fights or reading scripture or anything.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking right now there are Christians that maybe they'll watch this and go, well, I wonder, do Christian fighters win more than atheist fighters? Do they do we have an edge somehow in that? And of course I'm thinking that's probably, God's going to let happen what's going to happen. But how do you communicate to the religious mindset, to the people who say, especially things like, that MMA fighting is just big guys beating their brains in, and it's vulgar, or it's over the top, or it's just not right? And how do you speak to the religious mindset, to the people who question the authenticity of the ministry? How do you approach those folks? I mean, how do you explain it to them? How do you tell them? Say, look, you're kind of off base because of this or that. What do you say to those folks?
Well, I'll tell you what, it is a real challenge, and we actually did like a missions window at a church on Sunday morning here in Las Vegas, and for the most part, we were accepted very well. And I even had some older, saints come up to me in the lobby and ask me for my card, because they said, I'm going to take this card home and I'm going to pray for you because I think you're doing a great thing. And that was awesome. But I did have one guy come up to me in the lobby where we had like a little table set up, and he started to pose some of those questions to me, and I could tell that, I wasn't going to get very far with him, that he really wanted to just debate and argue. And he was telling me how, I like boxing because it's not as violent, and if you knock a guy down, they count to 10, and he gets back up, and they make sure he's okay. And, MMA is just too violent. The guys just jump on top of you, and once they knock you down, they go to finish you off and all this stuff. And I think that it's mostly just a matter of education. I know that a lot of people back where I'm from in Indiana, they have a lot of questions about it, and they think that it is a barroom brawl. That you just got two guys jumping off the stools at a truck stop and getting in a cage and beating each other up. But when I'm here and I'm in the gyms, and I know the pedigree of these guys, and I know that they were, Division I All-American wrestlers in college, and I know that, some of these athletes were Olympians. They won silver medals in the Olympics and all this kind of thing. I know their background, and I know for them it's nothing malicious, and it's not about violence. It's about testing themselves. It's about disciplining their bodies, and it's about going in, and it's all about competition. It's about continuing their career as a collegiate athlete and, making a living doing something that they love and that they're passionate about. And so, some people are going to get that and some people aren't.
Right. And hopefully that'll be the goal as Fight Church out there more and people watch the video and things like that to hear your heart. Because I think, you know, when we talked before about just the need, the desperate need for the church to be in places where people are, where the public is watching, where the where guys who you know who desperately need Jesus, you know, need to know that, need to know what's going on in your world. Let me just get to a couple of questions that kids were asking me. One was, how does when a Christian fighter fights, what is their mindset like versus the fighter who maybe might not be a Christian? How do the two mindsets, or how does a Christian prepare, or how does a Christian put in perspective that, you know, unlike, you know, football or other sports, he is about to go into a real deal match with a guy, and he is about to exchange. Where in youth group we would break those things up, right? We would say, guys, you cannot fight. Don't do that. You cannot beat each other up. And now, you know, you're in some guy's corner going, hey, go for it, you know. So what's the mindset between those two things? Or how does a Christian fighter prepare for those things, and how does he look at it?
Well, you know what, I would say that it probably has a lot more to do with personality than it has to do with your worldview, because, you know, the majority of those guys, like I said, they're going in there, their mindset is, this is a competition and I want to win. I want to win as fast as possible and as easy as possible without either person getting hurt. And so I would say that, you know, the guy who has faith, he might be dependent a little bit more on. We pray for safety. We pray for them to have muscle memory, and that, you know, that they'll remember the things that they worked so hard in training with. Whereas the other guy might be solely dependent on himself, and obviously not asking the Lord for those things. But I'd say it has a lot more to do with personality than it does with faith and worldview. I think that maybe the overall goals with the career and with the competition itself would be different, obviously, because as believers we do everything unto, you know, the Lord, and we want to be pleasing to Him in everything we do. So in defeat and in victory, we need to make sure that we're being Christ-like, and that sort of thing. And, you know, not letting anger get into it as well, because I mean, obviously it's close quarters, and you are on each other, and doing your best to defeat that person with submission or whatever. And so it's good as a person of faith to be a good sport.
And I imagine that bitterness would play a part as well, because there are, imagine, bitter rivals. People, and you see, and obviously that's what the media plays upon. It plays upon that fighters don't like each other, they're going to go and destroy each other, and all those things. Would you say there's a lot of that too that fighters have to deal with when you're ministering to fighters? They're not only dealing with the fact that maybe they lost, or they have bitterness, or those kind of things. What are some of those things that a fighter deals with in the midst of either post-fight or things like that?
I would actually say that it's not normally the case for there to be rivals or bitterness. Maybe a little bit more like in the amateur levels and things. But the thing that amazes me, and once you get into the sport and you kind of become a big fan, you realize that these guys have such a mutual respect for one another, and they know that, hey, this guy's willing to put it all on the line to get in here and to test himself just like I am. You know, we're willing to make the same exact sacrifice to get in here and test our skills. And that really has such an amazing amount of respect the fighters have for one another and for the coaching staffs and everything. And so what I found is the majority of guys get in there and they have a great attitude about the whole thing. And when they do deal with bitterness and disappointment and stuff, it usually has to do with themselves. You know, after fights, guys are greatly disappointed if they lose, but normally it's not at the other guy unless he did something, you know, that they felt was not right, which is not usually the case. Right. Normally, if a guy struggles with it, he's like, you know, I should have pushed harder. I should have done this. You know, the disappointment normally lays solely on them, and they're disappointed in themselves.
Okay. One of the other questions too is, do you guys actually have Fight Church? I mean, do you guys have regular Bible studies, or do you have a day of the week, or do you do stuff on Sunday, things like that, to create that kind of chapel type of environment before that, or how do you do those things?
Well, logistically, it's almost impossible to pull more than a handful of guys together at all times because they're all at different gyms. They all have practices at different times. Sometimes when a guy's not at an MMA gym doing, work with other fighters, he's at a local, another fitness gym doing cardio, or sometimes, they teach a class to make some money, and then they might do private sessions. And so everybody's on these different schedules, and they're working multiple jobs. So it's really, really difficult. And we've tried several times to get, 10, 15, 20 guys together all at once. But really, if you get 2 or 3 guys together at once, you're doing really, really well. So primarily we focus on that because it's feasible. And so I meet with guys one-on-one, or I meet with guys 2 or 3 at a time. And then also my family hosts families at our house for dinner and then for fellowship and discipleship, depending on where they're at on their spiritual journey.
So while the fighter may be training, you invite their families if they happen to be in town or things like that. You invite them over to your homes and fellowship with them while the guy's out working.
Well, and a lot of these guys have relocated here. Like I said, they're usually in their early 20s, early 30s, so they have a girlfriend, they have a wife, and a lot of them have young children. And so, my wife and I have 3 kids. And my kids are training at different gyms here and there, and so they bump into kids, and then they find out, oh, their dad is so-and-so, and so we do our best to reach the whole family, not just the fighters themselves.
Well, I love the fact, too, that Fight Church isn't a church in the sense that we know church. Right. I love the fact that the church is just being the church. It's just those small one-on-one encounters, those one-on-one and 2, 3, 4 small group type scenarios, and that it's not some circus of spirituality, where just crazy things go on. And really, and Josh, I just appreciate that as a believer. I appreciate it as a pastor, as a youth pastor myself. I just think that's the heart of those things. Another question that a kid asked too is that have you met any famous MMA guys? Have you met the Iceman? Have you met Couture? Have you met these guys? Are they out there? Are they bumping shoulders in the world with which you're in?
I have pretty much met anyone that you could name at some point or another. A lot of guys are based here, right here in Las Vegas. Obviously, it's the home of the UFC. It's the fight capital of the world. Some of the biggest and best gyms are here in town. I visit those gyms on a regular basis. One of the reasons why MMA is so successful and has grown exponentially is because the fighters are so accessible. And it really is true. When I was working at the grocery store when we first moved here to Las Vegas, I bumped into Forrest Griffin, who is one of the fan favorites, one of the biggest names in MMA. I bumped into him 2, 3, 4 times a week because every day on his way to and from the gym, he would stop at our grocery store and get his Starbucks. And so I talked to him on several occasions. And now that I'm in the gyms, I bump into everyone. I actually, right behind me on this wall, there's a picture of my wife and my daughter with Ronda Rousey. There's a picture of my youngest son with Chuck Liddell, who is his favorite fighter. And then there's the one that you can see at the bottom is my oldest son with Michael Chandler, who is the lightweight champion of Bellator and is a very outspoken believer and a great, great guy that we've worked with on several occasions.
Well, let me tell you what, my son will be glad. My son is a huge MMA guy. He loves the fights. I watch them with him occasionally. And he, it's so important for young men to see guys who can get in a ring and duke it out, who are people of faith. I remember back in the day, and I don't know if you remember this early on, I remember a guy in those days when you were getting those videos, there would be a guy who I remember used to carry a cross to the ring. Do you remember that guy? And he actually had a tattoo of a cross on his back.
Yeah, it was Chemo.
Yes.
I've actually been in touch with him via the internet and emailed back and forth with him. He lives over in California.
Well, that was one of my first exposures to that, and I thought, man, he played the music. It was dramatic. He brought it to the ring, and I thought, wow, Jesus is here. This is awesome. And I thought, man, I don't think any area is untouched by the gospel in some way, because God always brings people like yourself or other people who come and bring and do ministry like that. And as we begin to wrap this up, tell me something that has surprised you about the MMA culture. What is caught you off guard, or you just look around and you say, I didn't think it would be like this?
I think that the biggest thing is kind of what I already described as far as how accepting everyone was. They're very standoffish at first because here in Las Vegas, people are very skeptical anyway because everyone's trying to get rich and make a buck. And then in the MMA world, it's 10 times worse because the sport's growing so fast and everyone's trying to jump on the gravy train. And so everybody you bump into, oh, I'm a manager, or I have an apparel company, or whatever. And so when I first started 3 years ago visiting the different gyms, I would go into the gyms and I'd speak with whoever was the gym manager or whatever, and I'd say, hey, I'm Josh Boyd, I'm an MMA chaplain, which, no one knew what that was because there was no such thing. And so I would say, I was hoping to be able to hang out here at the gym a little bit and get to know guys. That way when they're going through a rough time, this and that. And they were all like, well, what do you want? What do you want? And I'd be like, oh, I don't need anything, just access and da-da-da. And so it was really a slow go at first. But then, they would pull me into the office and they'd be like, all right, let's just get down to brass tacks here. What are you looking for? What do you need? What do you want? What's your angle? And I would explain it to them again, and I'd say, listen, I'm here. I just want to donate my time. I want to be available. And it was amazing to see the transformation on their face because once they saw that I was really there, that week after week I would come, even though they would turn me away. Once they saw that, they would be like, you know what, that sounds awesome. And they would say, you totally can do that. Why wouldn't we want you to do that? And I would even have gym managers, and I still do to this day. Every once in a while, they'll call me up and they'll be like, hey, I don't know if you can, but do you know so and so? Can you talk with them? I know that their mom is real sick, or that their brother passed away, or whatever. And so I have all these allies, and I have all these people in the MMA world that are totally on board, and very few of them are probably believers. And so I think that that's the thing that has shocked me, is all these people that were supposed to be so rough and tough and worldly. I was thinking, oh, I'm going to be the outsider. And they've really just embraced us with open arms and swung open doors that I never thought would be possible.
Wow. Well, Josh, how long have you been doing this again, Josh? How many years?
Just about 3 years. This fall, September, it'll be 3 years.
Okay. Well, what would you say, what can the local church do for you? How can believers support Fight Church and support one of the largest growing sports in the world? How can the local church wrap its arms around these guys who are just guys? They're just guys. There's big guys. They're really big guys. But how can we get our arms around them? How can we get our arms around you and the ministry that you have to them? What can the local church do for you?
I think the biggest thing is to pray for us. If you know that there's plenty of people, I mean, obviously you always want more, but there's lots of people praying for, clean water projects in Africa because they know about them. There's all kinds of people praying for, unrest in the Middle East and that sort of thing because it's out there. But not too many people know that there's such thing as MMA ministry. They don't know that there's a guy and his family here in Vegas with some volunteers, working these fight events. And so just getting the word out about who we are and what we do and praying for us and just continuing to help us with exposure. I think that that's the biggest and the easiest thing that people could do for us is just let other people know that we exist. The more people that know, but right now very few people know about us, and so it's very hard to get the funding we need and to get the other services and products and different things that we need to make this happen.
Well, we're going to do our best, Josh, we'll promote the fire out of this video. I'll tell you, that whatever I can do, obviously, hopefully the people that are going to watch this, you need to share it wherever you can share it everywhere, and let people know that what Josh is doing is so important, it's so critical. It's so critical, and this is so connected. I mean, it's connected to everything, but for us as youth pastors, I mean, young men, right, between the ages of probably 14 and 30, this is their sport, more so than basketball, more so than baseball, more so than anything. If you think your kids are just wrapped up in these traditional sports, they're not. They're wrapped up in getting pay-per-views and watching these fights, guys. So please share this, because this is impacting obviously youth ministry in ways, and obviously we're losing enough young men as it is in the church, and we got to have those young men. And so if you're watching the video, please share it with everybody you can share it with. And Josh, too, have you had a chance to pray with Joe Rogan? Because I'm sensing that Joe Rogan needs Jesus too. It's a fair assessment?
You know, I've met him very quickly, but I haven't had any formal interaction with him. But you know what? I tune into his podcasts, and I keep tabs on him and keep track of him, because I'd love to have a great conversation with him at some point or another.
Well, we're going to pray for that meeting, Josh. I'm going to specifically pray for that, because I just feel like he needs the Lord, and I think you can bring a word of truth to him, and I think that'd be fantastic. But Josh, we're going to go ahead and get off here in just a few seconds. But I want to thank you, Josh. Josh, thank you for stepping out in faith. Thank you for ministering to these young men that are in their 20s, that are searching, they're just like anybody else in any other sport, in any other facet, walk of life. They're looking for a real Jesus, and thank you for doing that. Thank you for being obedient to what the Lord's asked you to do, and we're going to do our best to support you. Those of you that are watching, you guys be sure to go ahead and share this video. Please share it with your youth ministry. Why not put it on? Just put it up and say, look, watch this interview with Josh Boyd, and see what he's talking about. And then maybe your youth ministry could pray for MMA. Maybe we could start a movement among youth ministries about praying for the ministry, and have fight church prayer nights or something. We could do something. I mean, we can motivate these guys. And so anyway, thank you guys for viewing, watching. And Josh and I are going to talk off air in just a second. But you guys that are watching, please share it. Thank you for joining me today for Off the Shelf. I'm your host, Paul Turner, and we will see you next time.